Scene that had students sleeping on sidewalks, we were told. Sellout crowd for the first time in 7 years, and an attendance record at Wake. 1.8 to go, Duke down by 4. On the inbounds, it's picked, and the party is on in Winston-Salem.
Welcome back, Duke fans. It's Jack and JD, and we've got a fun North Carolina rivalry to look forward to this weekend. Duke heading to Wake Forest for the first time since the scene of the crime, Kyle Filipowski's court storming incident last year, and Duke is going to be playing their best opponent, I would say, since Louisville at this Wake Forest team. A Wake Forest team who's coming off a close win against North Carolina, who is second in the ACC behind Duke. And this should be a good competitive basketball game with the two North Carolina schools. And what I would say is it's a rivalry game, but it may not be at the same level, certainly, of a North Carolina.
Not the same level of North Carolina as far as rivalry, although clearly if you just take last year's loss and this year's opportunity to revenge that loss, then it's part of the North Carolina thumping we took last year, especially at the heels of NC State, Wake Forest. And how did we do against UNC last year?
That's right. We lost both games. So we were, let's do a little quick math. We went 1-2 against NC State, 0-2 against North Carolina, so that's 1-4, and we went 1-1 with Wake Forest, so that puts us at 2-5 against North Carolina last year. I've got a good feeling that number could reverse this season.
Certainly, if you're John Shire and you're trying to fire up the troops, this is one where it shouldn't take a lot of kindling.
No, it should not. And I think just reminding the team of that game from last year, along with the fact that this Wake Forest team, yes, Duke is 16-2, 8-0 in the conference. They're on a 12-game winning streak. Wake Forest isn't too far behind. They're 15-4, 7-1, second in the conference, and they're on a 6-game winning streak of their own. So this is it should be an easy one to get the guys, fired up and motivated for, which I think will be nice for Coach Shire, because I think the past couple of games it may have been a little bit difficult to get the guys fired up for some of the opponents, but this one I think should be relatively easy, to your point.
I think Coach Shire at his weekly meeting with the press said, I want to see our defense step it up a bit. And he said, yes, part of the letdown in our defense, as we've said the last two games, is the absence of Malik Brown. And we will not have Malik here, as they're going to give him as much time as necessary for that knee to feel good. And I still think he'll be back for Illinois, is my prediction. But he is trying to he's pressing every button he can to try to get them psyched, and for no repeat of what happened last year.
Yeah, absolutely. And without Malik Brown, our margin for error as a team is a little bit less, right? Just because of how disruptive Malik was or is. He's still around. Is defensively. And then, additionally, the part of his game that's underrated because he averages 2 or 3 points per game is his ability offensively to be a connector, get guys open with screens or with his passing ability. And so we definitely missed that, and we hope that Malik is healthy and back soon. With that being said, for this game, as you said, we're not going to have him. And so we're going to need some good minutes from Patrick Gangpa. And we're going to get into the Duke side in the back half of this video. But for the start, let's talk about Wake Forest. Because Coach, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, take us through Wake Forest.
Coach Steve Forbes is now in his 6th season at Wake Forest, and he's still looking for his first NCAA tournament appearance. And there's been certainly a couple of times they had a 25-win season a couple of years ago. They didn't make the tournament. Some of those wins were in the NIT. Last year, they were on the bubble. They beat Duke. Everyone puts them in the tournament, and then they finish the year like 1-4 or 2-4 or something, and they play their way out of the tournament. So Coach Forbes is in in Wake Forest is in a very similar situation to what they were last year. Despite their record right now being 15-4 and 7-1 in conference, they don't have the quad one wins that would get them in. If you look at bracketology, they're not even in like the next 4 out. And you would think with that record, they would be. So they really need this win against Duke. It is one of the few opportunities in conference play for a big time quad one win for Wake Forest. And they are going to be playing much better than I think they did against North Carolina. For anybody who watched that game, it was tough to watch. It was a low-scoring game at 67-66, but not because great defense was played. And Wake Forest, who has been struggling to find their point guard, it had been better of late with Tyler Johnson, and I'll get into that in a second. But in the game against North Carolina, they had 22 made field goals. They only had 7 assists. They had a really tough time moving the ball. North Carolina's defense is good. It is not as good as the Duke defense.
Not that good.
No. And it is certainly going to be a challenge for Wake Forest against Duke's defense if they show up, if they play their A game. We've seen at times this year where Duke's defense has kind of dipped a bit, right? We saw in the first half where Chad Venning was looking like DJ Burns with Boston College. We saw it certainly at the end of the game against Notre Dame. Duke has got to stay locked in against Wake Forest, although we'll get into their team. But do you have any thoughts you want to share right now before we start breaking down the roster?
Just to back up those losses, it was to Michigan by 2. I think it was like the first game of the year. And then Florida and Xavier dismissed them by around 15.
They beat Michigan by 2. That's their best win of the season. I'm looking at it right now. Let's just...
Okay.
I totally understand. They lost, as you said, Florida, Texas A&M. Clemson is their lone conference loss, and Xavier was their 4th loss. So it's in the order of when they happen: Xavier, Florida, Texas A&M, Clemson.
And Clemson beat them by 11. And
worth noting, though, that game was at Clemson, which I think is certainly important.
And so, this is a chance. The ACC finally got a little love in the AP 25 poll. I think Louisville made it in.
They've been on a tear. It's just been awesome for them. They crushed SMU the other night. And they've been, since they lost to Kentucky, I'm not exactly sure how many they've won in a row, but to your point, it's been great because now the ACC has 2 schools ranked in the top 25 for the first time in several weeks. All right, let's keep going with Wake Forest's roster. So I think if you guys have been, watching Duke basketball, you're certainly going to be familiar with these first 2 names on Wake Forest: Hunter Salas and Cam Hildreth. Hildreth has been with Wake Forest. He's a senior now. It's his 4th year with the program. He's averaging 14 points per game, but that actually bumps up to over 17, almost 18 in conference play. 4 rebounds, 3 assists, 1.5 steals. And Coach Forbes really trusts Hildreth. He plays 34 minutes a game. There's 3 players that Coach Forbes has a lot of trust in over the rest of the roster, and we're going to touch on them right away. Hunter Salas, averaging just under 20 points per game. Again, his numbers go up in conference play, 22 points per game in conference, slightly down after the North Carolina game. 4 rebounds, 3 assists, also 1.5 steals, and he plays 36 minutes a game. Their starter at the power forward position is the third guy that Coach Forbes clearly has a lot of faith in compared to the rest of the roster, and that's transfer Trayvon Spillers, who actually played against Wake Forest in the NIT last season. He's averaging 10 points, 9 rebounds, and about a block and a steal in 33 minutes. He's a good defensive forward. He can score in the post. He's about 6'8", 6'9", with like hook shots, but he's not a three-point shooter. He'll hit one occasionally. I'm sure he'll hit one against Duke, but it's not really his game. And then, so that's your 2 through 4. Those are your 3 main guys. Their center has consistently been Efton Reed, who's the third guy of 5 starters who returned that Duke played against last year, and 3 of 4 rotation players for Wake Forest that returned. He transferred along with Hunter Salas from Gonzaga last year, so they're both in their second year at the program. Efton Reed is a big center, 7 foot, 250 plus pounds, 8 points, 6 rebounds, and a block. He plays about 27 minutes per game. Part of the reason for that is he does foul a lot. 3.3 fouls is his average. So that is something to watch. Now, I mentioned Tyler Johnson a little bit earlier. Part of the reason for Wake Forest turnaround and playing better basketball, part of the reason why Hunter Salas and Cam Hildreth are scoring more in conference play has been that they found something with Tyler Johnson as the point guard, because losing Boopy Miller really hurt this Wake Forest team early on in the season. And playing Salas or Hildreth at the point guard spot really, both of those guys have been much less efficient this season, and it really hurt them not having a point guard. So Tyler Johnson has been playing the point guard spot and starting, and in conference play, he's averaging 7 points, 3 assists, and 2 steals. And everyone's numbers have, as I mentioned, they're not only has Salas and Hildreth's numbers improved, but their three-point shooting has been much better in conference play as well, as a result of Tyler Johnson being inserted into the starting lineup. They still don't shoot very many. They're in the bottom couple of teams in number of three-point attempts in the conference, and Duke is at the top. So that is going to be something that I'm curious how the three-point battle is going to unfold Saturday.
All I could say is when you post our video, you should just have the image of them storming the court. And not only will that give the motivation, which I think it will, to the players, it will also give it to the Duke fan base to say, not in their backyard, as opposed to our backyard. No. This is not going to happen a second time in their backyard. One of the things that I certainly am going to look forward to watching in this game is with the, Hunter Salas, just under 20 points per game. I think he's going to be the target of Duke having now this reputation of saying, who is the number one scorer on the other team, and creating great emphasis on not allowing that person to get on a roll. And so I do see Hunter Salas as the guy they're going to focus on and potentially hold to under, drum roll, 10 points.
Going to need to. Last year in the game at Wake Forest, we couldn't guard Hunter Salas. He had 29 points. He was outstanding. And that
Not
was
going to happen again.
I'm with you. We have a lot more options that we'll get into later. Just a minute. I want to finish out Wake Forest, and then we'll get into some of the options. It's a great call, though. So off the bench, they've got Juke Harris, who is a pretty talented freshman. He's had some up and downs, but he has been playing better of late. Parker Fredrickson, I really thought he was going to take a good step forward this year, and it hasn't happened for Fredrickson. I thought he looked good last year in the games I saw. He shot 36% from three, almost 37% as a freshman. This year, he's shooting 20%, and he's a good shooter. So, again, I am sure he'll get going against Duke. That's just how things work. Last three guys who they may or may not get minutes. We'll see. Omaha Billieu was a top 10 recruit. Went to Iowa State last year. Didn't play very much at all. Transferred to Wake Forest. Played a little bit. Got hurt. Just came back 2 games ago. He's not playing very many minutes. Davin Cosby is a transfer who could really shoot it. Had some good games early for Wake Forest, but according to Coach Forbes, has been dealing with a toe injury. I know Duke fans are all too familiar with toe injuries, and has been struggling to find his rhythm kind of ever since, and has been playing 1-minute games. It's, I think, part because of the toe. They're not sure if he's ready to go, and then he can't play.
Can you pause right there, as long as you made the reference to Kyrie Irving and toe injuries? Do you realize he played only 11 games, appeared in only 11 games for Duke that season, and still wound up being the number 1 draft pick by the Cleveland Cavaliers? I mean, talk about, yeah, he's amazing, but you just can't really see it, because his attempt to come back in the ACC and then in the tournament was short-lived as well. So, speaking of toe injuries, just came to mind.
I mean, you're not wrong. And when you said that, it made me think of, just as a tangent, the Cavs also have had success recently. They drafted Darius Garland. I don't remember exactly what pick he was, but another small guard who had an injury, only played in 5 games of his college career. The Cavs have the market cornered for picking injured guards and having great success, because no one would argue that someone else should have been picked instead of Kyrie Irving. That's for sure. To finish up the Wake Forest roster in terms of guys who potentially could play, the last one is Churchill Abbas, transfer from DePaul, undersized center, 6'9", 240. Plays occasional minutes at the backup 5. A lot of times Coach Forbes likes to play Trayvon Spillers at the backup 5, and I think he'll be able to get away with that against Duke, because we know, Coach Shire is going to mix in some lineups without a center, with let's say Gillis technically at the center spot, and so he'll be able to work that in. The most interesting thing to me on Wake Forest, though, I don't think this team is as good as it was last year, and I think Duke is certainly much better than it was last year, and I have the numbers to kind of back it up. So last year's Wake Forest on KenPom, and they finished really bad. They had a really tough finish to the year. They still finished. They had a decent NIT run that probably helped a little bit. They still finished 28th in the net rating. They were 25th in offense and 59th in defense. This year didn't make the tournament. They were 21-14. They had picked up a couple wins in the NIT.
We've seen it must have been a really bad end to the season, but we've seen other teams at 21-14, or even worse, still make the tournament. A lot of times that happens because they won their conference championship. So
Yes, yeah, it was a really bad end to the season, and if you remember, there was a lot of bid stealers last year. A lot of, as we know, NC State. I think Oregon may have been one. There were several bid stealers last year. Pittsburgh was the ACC team with the biggest gripe to not make it, in my opinion. So this year, they're 77th in net rating, 152nd on offense. The one area, though, they have been really good, defense. 33rd in defense. This is going to be the toughest defensive team Duke has played against since George Mason, who's actually ranked in the top 25 defense, which says if George Mason could be a tough draw in the NCAA tournament if they were to make it that far. But I digress. I think Wake Forest at home, their offense will play better, and I think their defense will make this a good competitive game that we will break down later what our predictions are. So on the Duke side of things, go ahead.
Well, first, before I go there, I have to say this is the deepest, Jack, you've gotten in breaking down the entire roster of a opponent. And so I'm just curious, do you have stats on the guys that go out and, wipe the floor with their towel? Like, is it 2.3 seconds? Is it how quickly do they get off the bench? I mean, this is some pretty deep statistics. So
it's a fair question. Unfortunately, I don't have stats on the Wake Forest managers. I will say that this Wake Forest team, compared to previous teams that Duke has played of late, is very familiar to me. We've seen these guys. And even the guys who are new to Wake Forest, we've seen in other places, or I've become a little bit familiar because this Wake Forest team, there's been a number of close games over the past few years with Duke, and so it's a little bit easier to do a deeper dive on these guys than someone else.
Well, and in terms of, I know that in sports, we love to say it's a rivalry game. And you go, well, do the rosters, are they the same that played against each other? And as you aptly pointed out that several of the key players from last year's Wake Forest win are back. But in Duke's case, there could be only two players. And that would be...
one of them, Mr. Foster, is going to play 10 to 15 minutes.
So that just leaves Proctor.
Right.
How did Proctor play last year?
So last year, I'm glad you brought it up. I still have the stats. So last year, this was the game where actually Caleb Foster was playing really well, and then he aggravated, I think it was his ankle, and this was his last game of the year, which really hurt Duke. Although, I guess maybe not so much. They still ended up going to the Elite Eight, but it would have been nice to have Caleb Foster last year. Proctor ended up playing 31 minutes. He had 14 points, 5 of 10 from the field, 4 of 8 from 3, and he had 3 assists. I may be misremembering this, so for those of you guys who are commenting, let me know how you guys remember this, but I feel like the last couple plays of the game was where Duke lost. I think there was a bad play by Roach, if I remember correctly, and I want to say Proctor, but I don't quite remember, in all fairness. I'm going to look.
All right. Look, here's what I think from the Duke side, the 3 keys for me for the game. And the first is that Duke is going to have to slow down that backcourt, and the primary focus is going to be on Hunter Silas. They've done this with the lead scorer on the opponent team mercilessly throughout their run. So that's the first thing. The second thing is this is purely a vengeance game. There should be very little for Duke to have to get up for this game, especially in a hostile environment against a highly rated Wake Forest defense. And so Duke is going to have to be up for this. And I listened to Coach Shire's weekly thing, and he said the defense has to get better. And that's that reference I made earlier saying he recognizes that Malik Brown is not there, and that's a key component of what made this defense so good. So the rest of the players have to tighten up their screws. I think that there's going to be a heavy reliance on Sion James and Mason Gillis here because they are very experienced. They can be extremely disruptive, especially Mason Gillis. And he could, both of them could guard a variety of players. And I see them having important minutes here in this game. And in fact, the third element of our defense is going to have to be Proctor, who tends to get the assignment of the best guard because of Proctor's footwork, which has just been tremendous. And so I don't know that Proctor has a big scoring game if he is especially focused on Hunter Salas. So that's what I'm looking for. I'd love to say, keep saying it, that it could be a breakout game for Caleb Foster, but after 2 or 3 times in a row of being disappointed, I'm just going to say I'll be pleasantly surprised if that happens. So 3 keys, definitely slowing down Salas, Duke looking for vengeance, and I think they are going to come away with the win and go to 9-0, and it'll be 13 wins in a row. But I think that will only happen with my third key, which is Sion James and Mason Gillis having really good all-around games. And that leaves out the X factor. It's like even hard to talk about Cooper Flagg. What kind of game does Cooper have? This is a big one, and he tends to shine in the big ones, Jack.
Oh, he sure does. Quickly, I was looking at the play-by-play from last year. Roach had 2 turnovers in the last minute and 15 seconds, and Proctor had one near the end of the game when Duke was down 2. So I was mostly right, I would say.
I would say you were spot on.
In regards to what you were talking about, though, I think those guys are going to be important because of the environment. And they've been important all year long as just the steadying presence. I think Gillis is going to probably need to hit a couple of shots. I think Sion James, I'm not sure if Proctor is going to get the Salas or the Hildreth matchup. I could see it being Hildreth, and the only reason why is because I think Proctor guarded Salas last year. That I could definitely be wrong about. I can't look it up either. So, but part of the reason I say that is because Salas is a little bit bigger than Proctor, and both Salas and Hildreth like to score from the mid-range area where they can shoot over guys. Hildreth especially likes to post up. I think Proctor will handle Hildreth a little bit better, and I think Sion will pose more challenges for Salas. The question, though, becomes, would they put Con Knipple on Tyler Johnson, who's not a shooting threat, but he is pretty fast, and he could get downhill into the defense. So I'm not really sure which way I'm leaning with that. I'm very curious how that's going to play out for Coach Shire. And speaking of Con Knipple and your theme of vengeance, Con Knipple's coming off his first scoreless game of his college career, and now he's going to be playing in a tough environment against a good defense. I want to see how Con Knipple responds, because I think this is a challenging matchup for him. And coming off of his performance against Boston College, I really want to see him. It doesn't necessarily mean he's got to score 20, but I want to see him have a much better game than he did against Boston College.
It could be, but it's almost forcing me to give my prediction of the score of this game, because points are going to be, with two good defenses and Shire emphasizing defense, this game's going to be played in the 60s. It's going to be like 67-62. Duke wins by 5. And that's just because it's going to be a slugfest. And if we're right that Cooper Flagg has shined in his best moments against really good competition games, easily 20 plus points are coming from Cooper. And so I don't know that we need anybody to be a big contributor. They all need to be able to say, he gave us 10, he gave us 10, he gave us 10, and we'll get to the 67 points. But it's going to be a scrappy game, of which I think it's a 5-point win by Duke.
I think Duke wins 72-65. A little bit higher scoring, roughly the same ballpark. I think part of the reason why I say that is, while Wake Forest's defense is good, I think Duke's offense has gotten a lot better, especially over the past month. Duke is now on KenPom number 1. They passed Auburn. They have the number 1 net rating in college basketball, with the number 2 defense and the number 3 offense. They have been just fantastic. I think Duke's ability to shoot the 3 is going to be the difference. I could actually see Duke kind of scoring more later in the game. But boy, oh boy, this game has all of the makings of the trap game. I've said for a few weeks, the game that I'm worried about is Clemson. That's right. But this game, certainly at Wake Forest, they need it. They don't want it. They need this win to, really get them into the tournament. They're going to be playing much better than they did against North Carolina. I think it's going to be a very competitive game. To your point, Cooper, Sharpie, 20 points. Just the amount of confidence you could have in any player. It's just unbelievable how good he's been, and how much better he's gotten since he turned 18 has just been insane.
And keep it going. And how much better he could be. He is nowhere near his ceiling.
Well, to that point, I'm glad you said that, because about a little over a month ago, before he turned 18, I said to you, I looked at his stats, right? And I said to you, I looked at his stats. I looked at Kevin Durant. I was like, when you look at what Durant did at Texas, he's just not quite on the same level as Durant. Durant was only a few months older, so it's not like the age thing was that big a deal. And a month later, he's putting up pretty much similar numbers to what Kevin Durant did at Texas. It is remarkable how fast he's taken a leap. And to your point, how the sky's the limit. And there was a lot of talk at the start of the year. Yes, he's penciled in as the number 1 pick right now, but there's the Rutgers guys. There's the guy in France. There's Edgecombe at Baylor. There's lots of people who could pass him up. At this point, all of that talk has basically been muted. I don't hear anybody talking about someone else as the number 1 pick. So he's just been awesome, and I'm just very excited, and I love watching Cooper Flagg play, because at this point, every game you see something spectacular.
Well, we've already seen him play more than Kyrie Irving. So that is a good thing. But, one other thing that dawns on me that could happen here is if the game is a physical game and their center, and this could go either way, Mal can't get into foul trouble again. We can't have another one of those situations where, come on, Malowich. And please, if you have a minute, check out Jack's video on Common Malowich. It really is a nice job. But and combined with Patrick Gamba, both guys can't be like, oh God, they're both at 4 fouls right away, and that we're nursing them through the first half of the game, because we do have to have a presence in the middle. And Mal's going to have his hands full with Reed, because Reed's no small boy, 7 feet, 250 pounds, and been around. And yes, he fouls, but he's a big presence in there. So Mal cannot just do whatever he wants to do in the middle. So he's going to have to, both of our big guys are going to have to play with that. And look, that could go either way. Reed could get into foul trouble, which opens up the whole middle, which changes the nature of the game. But we can't let that happen to us.
No, you're spot on, and that is the exact area where Duke's margin for error has diminished without Malik Brown. Right? Kamal Malawach can't get into foul trouble. The one thing I will say, unlike Mr. Venning, is Efton Reed is just, he's not like a skilled offensive post player. And we didn't give Mr. Venning enough credit going into the Boston College game. I've seen Efton Reed a lot more than Venning. I don't see him getting Malawach into foul trouble in the same way. I think if Mal gets into foul trouble, it will be fighting for rebounds. It will be contesting someone else's drive. That's kind of how I see it happening. But to your point, we just can't afford that happening in this game, because especially with Malik out, the defense isn't quite the same when Malawach is off the court, although Duke had a ton of success with the small ball-ish lineup when Gillis was in at center. I have two last things before we get to the end here. Also, want to say, make sure to drop your score predictions in the comments below. What do you think is going to happen in this game with Wake Forest? First of which is a little bit of sad news, but Dickie V was supposed to come back, and he was supposed to be on the call for this game. Unfortunately, he had a fall and will not be calling this game with Dave O'Brien. It would have been great to have Dickie V back on the broadcast. When I was a kid, he was the guy who I remember, and his passion for the game just made it a lot more fun. There's nobody like him. There's nobody like him.
I'd go further, since, as all of our listeners know, I'm a little older than you. So I remember Dickie V coming on the scene. And college basketball took off for 2 reasons. One was the college matchup between Larry Bird and Magic Johnson. That was the start of it, but what made it exciting and interesting and fun, until people decided he was, let's make fun of his craziness, was Dickie V. And Dickie V could turn a game between 2 unranked teams into one of the most exciting games. But give him an opportunity with a game like this, all of his expressions, he's a PTPer, this is prime time. I mean, it's sad that he's not going to be able to be at this game. And, for our listeners, they don't know the arc of Dickie V's careers. His books, are absolutely terrific analysis of the college game and how it's to be played. He really is the master class during that period of being able to bring energy as an announcer with really good insight. And Yeah, maybe occasionally he was a little biased to the Dukies, but everywhere he went, there was just a lot of joy when he was calling the game.
100%. I'm glad you added that context there. The other bit of news on a more positive note, hoping that Dickie V gets healthy and is able to call a Duke game before the end of the season. On a little bit of a change of pace, I don't have a good transition to this. I apologize. But we all know Jalen Blakes hit the game winner last Saturday against North Carolina. What some of us may not know is less than 24 hours later, his sister Michaela hit a game winner for Vanderbilt over Tennessee. What a weekend for the Blakes family. Part of the Duke Brotherhood as far as I'm concerned. And just what a great weekend for the Blakes family.
Um, Absolutely. I could continue to do this and talk about Jeremy Roach's play, and there's been some concern that he has not been playing up to par in following the Brotherhood. But good a time as any, though. We'll do a whole show on this about Duke's recruiting class. I guess that I don't know how many guys are coming back, but among the guys coming in, Jack, the Boozer twins, Nicholas Kamenia, who is the power forward they signed, and they just signed Shelton Henderson. These are all 5-star recruits. So for anyone concerned about what are we going to look like next year, don't worry. They're doing just fine. And Shelton's actually said it was Jay Lucas. He loves Coach Shire, but he's from Texas, and it was Jay Lucas that he really bonded with. So the next year's class is looking great. But let's take it home, Jack, because we've got a real game where we are not everyone listening. We're not going to lose 2 in a row in Wake Forest. We're winning this one, maybe a little closer than I want, but we're going to win it.
That's a good way to end it to me. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. We're going to be covering Duke all year long. I've got some NBA draft stuff as well. Please like this video. It helps us grow. Leave a comment if you want to talk about anything. You want to talk about the mascots, the managers, coaches, you name it. Drop a comment. We'll be more than happy to chat Duke basketball with you and share it with your friends. We'll see you guys next time. Peace.